What matters is not whether or not you intended to do it or how people feel about it. What matters is what objectively happened.
Hello, everyone. This is Rob. I'm joined here by Dave, and welcome to Shrink Space. Dave, as you might be able to see, I am not in my traditional white hole of an office today. I'm actually recording this from a hotel room.
Yeah, this is
today.
The first time it looks like this is not a hostage video from you. So I think the viewers are going to be very excited about the change in background. Rob gets on and Rob's like, I don't know what to do. The video, I know this background and the lighting is not so good. And I'm like, this looks miles better than the basement video we typically get.
Yeah, I can tell it's there's a bit more background. It does not look like I'm in a hostage situation here. So it's my turn for the topic today. I have a topic that's, I think, inspired by you is the right way to say it.
This is about wisdom, emotional control and composure.
You know, I think we all have goals in life, and I can imagine that those are your goals over time. I'm not sure you're quite there yet. No, I'd like to talk about impact versus intent. This is a topic that I know I hear a lot about, just out in the world. This is a topic that, as psychologists, we tend to talk about a lot. At least I tend to talk about a lot when doing my work, particularly when talking with leaders and organizations. And it got me thinking a bit more as to why. Why is this something that we talk about? Why is this a framework that is used so frequently? I would say where you come in is I see you as a very well-intentioned person whose impact leaves a variety of bodies in his wake.
That is not true.
No.
All right, I am going to be on this podcast. I am going to have a learner's mind. I'm curious to hear what you have to say, but just know that I'm operating from a point of distress, and I am seething, ready to pounce. Okay.
Yeah,
you know, like
calm. Yeah, the calm, mature. What you were describing yourself before.
Yeah, that's right.
This makes more sense. This makes more sense. Yeah. My goal today is to trigger you multiple times.
Well, I'm already.
The course of our conversation.
Good.
So, let me start by asking you a question. Would you say that you've experienced situations where your impact, which is how you made someone feel, your actions, how that landed with someone, was different than your intent? And intent here, I would define as, what you intend to get across to others, what you actually mean, what you were driven or motivated to do. You have situations that come to mind where that's happened?
Yes. I can give you many of examples when now I'm going to confirm what you said. There's many times when I think I am really witty or sort of very discerning about ideas or an objective thinker. And people, when I express my thoughts, people don't seem to be quite as receptive to my ideas as they should be. And they periodically leave, a little bit distressed when it's not my intention.
Yes. I too have found myself in similar situations. I think I've told a story in a previous episode about me leaving what I thought was a funny note on someone's car, and turned out it wasn't so funny. I feel like almost on a daily basis, this is my experience where, with my sense of humor,
where you're careening into
sarcasm,
people.
Yes. Where I think this is a funny thing to do or say. The people around me, when they hear this is going to be great. And more often than not, that's what I find to be funny and what others don't. I often find, you're a parent too. I find that in parenting, like, I had all this, especially before I had my first kid, like, all right, this is the type of parent I'm going to be. I'm going I'm going to be like an intentional parent. I'm going to do these things. And then I have kids and I'm like, no, I just need you to go to bed. I just need you to eat, not smell, and go to bed.
Yeah.
Whatever I need to do to make that happen is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you sometimes think your impact is not what you would like it to be?
Yes. So my impact, for example, at the end of a day when I'm tired, but I have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, hopefully, and my children are tired, but they don't. You can imagine that someone who has a fully developed prefrontal cortex is able to navigate their emotions and the emotions of others, particularly little kids. Yes. But more often than not, I find myself struggling to not just yell and scream when I need something to get done. My impact on the kids is not so great sometimes.
Well, I think it was, I don't know who it was. It was either like Simon Sinek or Adam Grant or Jordan Peterson, but one of those guys. But they were talking about how the most distressing thing a kid experiences is oftentimes when their parents raise their voice.
Yeah.
And I never think that when I yell that it's that distressing.
Yeah.
I think that this is just, I'm helping highlight what is important in your world right now. And that's going to be, that's my voice and not whatever game you're playing. But I am aware that it's my impact or my intention is not to be, not to shake their core, but I may be doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the same. I think for me, it's just at the moment, if I yell and scream, you're more likely to listen.
Yes.
Which may be true, but may have some ripple effects down the road.
Yes.
So I think we can both agree that we have experienced maybe more routinely, at least me, those situations where our impact on other people is not in alignment with our intentions.
Mm-hmm.
So
far, I agree with you. This phenomena happens. You've got me so far.
This thing occurs. All right.
This thing, I agree that sometimes impact is different than intent. I'm with you.
So as I was thinking through this, it also made me think, like, where did this framework come from? And I don't know that I know the answer to it. I would say I know I'm familiar with this given my training as an organizational psychologist. We are exposed in grad school to different laws, at least in the United States, that impact employment and employment decisions and an employee's experience in the workplace. So back in the 60s and 70s, for example, there were a number of court cases where I remember learning that discrimination against employees, it matters less what your intention is, and it matters more what the impact is. So there's this concept of disparate impact in a workplace setting where even if you don't intend to do something wrong, if your organization is 90% male and 10% female, you got to wonder, well, why that is, unless there's a bona fide reason for that to happen. So even if you weren't intending to be discriminatory, are there practices that are happening in an employment setting that have the impact of discrimination? That's how I'm familiar with this framework, at least how it was first introduced to me back in grad school. Do you remember when you've heard about this or how where it's come to you?
Yes. I'm trying not to sort of like tip my hand on, I'm trying to be open-minded, but yes, I think that the original idea of impact, like the idea of impact being more important than intention, started essentially, I think, in the workplace related to, sexual harassment. Yep. Boss comes in as a little handsy and then goes like, hey, just a joke, get back at it, and slaps the female, on the butt and goes, oh, I didn't mean anything by it. Right. And
or there's a get over it. Like you go,
yeah. Your emotions are less important than my emotions or whatever. I think that's the starting point of this.
Yeah.
This idea that,
I would agree. At least that's my understanding of it as well. There could be others. In fact, if you're listening and you have a some additional information about where this came from, you should leave that in the comments for us, because I couldn't come up with much more in my research online. Well, what I did find interesting as I was thinking about it more is, this is in employment settings, this is true where impact is the most important thing. But, as an avid watcher of Law and Order in the 90s, I learned a lot about the legal system and the justice system. And if you think about, if those of you who are familiar with different like charges against someone, if you kill someone else, right? There's like murder 1 and murder 2. And I think I'm getting this correct. Murder 1 is the worst one because you have intention behind what you're doing. And murder 2 is less worse because you may not have had the malice or intention behind killing someone else. So in other words, there's degrees of difference in other parts of our legal system here in the U.S. that don't necessarily exist, at least from my understanding. Again, comment please if I'm getting this wrong, but that don't exist in other parts of the legal system. Mm-hmm. Is that your understanding too?
Yes, that's my understanding. I mean, I think if you're talking about how this idea has evolved, I guess I would just add to it that I think it from a, you're sort of talking about two things. One is like the rule of law.
Yep.
Which I think is probably more fair than the way that psychologists in popular culture today are using the impact versus intent idea. Excuse me. The impact versus intent idea today, I think, is designed to protect the victim.
Yep.
Over, like that's our chief goal, is to say if you've been perpetrated against, if you're the victim of something, doesn't matter what the other person intended. What matters is that you've been hurt. And I think that's been the goal, is how do we protect people?
And
Does that make sense?
It's the focus on the victim or what is considered to be a marginalized group that has been affected in some way, shape, or form. Yep. I would say that's the thing. So regardless of where it came from, it's here. And I hear it routinely in my world. And I even use it, as I was mentioning before, in frameworks when having discussions with people. I think in just our day-to-day work, Dave, I mean, I know when I'm talking to a leader and I'm describing who they are, I might say, hey, here's maybe your intention. This is your personality, right? This is the lens through which you see the world. Mm-hmm. And here's how others might experience you. Here's your style or approach to work. That's going to be a lot more in alignment to their impact.
Right.
So I would see, for example, oftentimes we'll talk to people who are strong introverts. Like, hey, the social settings, being center of attention, being the focus of others, not my jam. But because of the nature of my role, I have to be. Mm-hmm. So I've had to learn to come up with some strategies to be successful in those types of situations. So who they are, their personality, and how they act, at least at work, are different. Mm-hmm. That's the difference maybe between, intent, personality, and impact, how you come across to others. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I use that a lot at work. Do you use that same framework?
Yeah, I don't. Maybe I should. I mean, I think it's different. I think I have, and maybe this is what you're going to get to, is I have some resentment over the idea that impact versus intent is more important, because I just don't think that that's true. And so I guess I would probably do some like mental gymnastics to get away from saying that. So like, I'll talk a lot about what somebody, how somebody thinks they're showing up and how it may or may not lead to the result that they're wanting. But I try to, because I have such a negative reaction to this construct, I will sort of talk about it from a behavioral standpoint. You think you're doing this, but the effect you're getting is that, right? And I'm saying the same thing, but I am very opposed to the idea that impact is more important. I'm sorry, that impact is more important.
So what I've been trying to do for the past 15 minutes is to get you to agree incrementally to all of this, knowing that you have this strong reaction. And what I haven't heard yet from you is that you don't do these things, maybe except for your last example there. So you don't disagree with it, I think, objectively. I think you disagree with it subjectively.
No, I disagree with it objectively. I think I'm the
So
only
let's
one that's
go into
objective.
Let's go into
Because-
it. Why does this framework not work for you?
Because it's not true. So like I agree with you that the framework exists.
Okay.
The idea that your intention is less important than the perceived impact on somebody else, I think is false. Like that premise is, I think if you break it down, is not reasonable. Because we're not talking about capital murder, right? If we're talking about, I didn't mean to drive my car into the crowd, but I did, and I mowed over a bunch of people, then what matters is not whether or not you intended to do it or how people feel about it. What matters is what objectively happened. What objectively happened is you killed X number of people when you drove your SUV through that crowd. And I think that I think we've taken my intention, what objectively happened, and then how people feel about it. And we've just said, like, let's just remove the objective piece and just always say that how I feel about it is more important than the original intent. I think that the intent and I think that the impact, the emotional impact, are both less important than what actually happened. And I think that because the psychological...
Say that again. You think say that one more time, because now you confuse me.
I think that the intention is not as important as what actually happened. And I think that the impact, like the emotional impact, is not as important as what actually happened. And for some reason, it's like we've reached in and gone like, let's take out the objective facts and then just talk about what this person wanted to do. And let's talk about how this other person feels about what happened. And it's like, wait a second, should we be talking about what actually happened? Is that not important?
But isn't that impact?
No.
What actually happened?
I wish. Impact is how people feel about what happened.
On them.
So the example would be if there is a boss that walks into I'm going to make this up, but there's a boss that walks into the office and the boss slaps the butt of his female secretary.
Sure.
Right. And the boss goes, I was just trying to have fun. That was his intention. The objective fact is you just inappropriately touched your secretary. That's a problem. It doesn't matter to me whether or not she loved it or hated it. You can't be doing that in the office. So even when it's a positive reaction, what matters is what did you just do? Versus if the boss walks in and says, hi, Susie, and she feels like it was too intimate. Well, all the boss said was hi. It's not the boss's problem that the impact was negative. And I think that we have gotten to this place now where people's emotional reaction to things can work independent from the data. Their experience in the past influences how they objectively evaluate or how they evaluate their world. And then we're all sort of stuck. I'm not saying it's us versus them, but the people around them are stuck dealing with the filter that has run through their emotional experience. And I think that's a problem.
But
does that make sense?
It does. Isn't that just reality though? I mean, I use sometimes an example when I'm talking to leaders, like, hey, if you're coming into a new team or organization, it's almost like dating, where you're coming to a new relationship, the other person's coming to a new relationship, and they bring the baggage and experiences that they have from all previous relationships to this one. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so you may get a reaction from something that you say or do that seems completely off the rails to you, but that other person makes a lot of sense because they had X, Y, and Z experience, and now they're seeing this thing, and it reminds them of that thing, and maybe they don't like it.
Yes. Right.
So now you're getting that reaction even if you have no idea what you did.
Right.
So I get what you're saying, but also it just seems like a thing that's going to just normally, generally happen. So are you saying that we should prevent it from happening, or we should do something about it?
I think that we should just remember that what happened matters when we are appraising an event.
Okay.
So for example, if we hire a new person at work, and they bring their past experiences in and they get easily distressed in the work environment when the organization as a whole goes, okay, what happened here? Is our culture broken because it's negatively affecting this person? And do we therefore do we need to adjust how our culture operates? Or do we go, actually, for this person that didn't work, so we're going to adjust around this person, but let's not interpret it like it's a holistic problem that this company has. And I think we are so hell-bent on always agreeing with the perceived victim that we sort of end up throwing out or criticizing appropriate behavior.
Okay. So I think part of what I learned preparing for this conversation today that may align with that a little bit is the context of how we're using this framework matters. Mm-hmm. So I actually found a couple of articles written by clinicians and counseling psychologists who would agree with you.
Oh, you did? I see. This is my other, back to the conspiracy theory. I think that I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that it's so in vogue because of the way that I've seen this. This is my experience, and it impacts me, which could be wrong, but I feel like there's less research, and I think that psychologists are not intellectually honest with how they view this. So I'm surprised that people were honest enough to do research and agree on the other side of it.
Well, I would say research is a strong word for the articles that I found. It was interesting when I tried to find actual research about the application of this framework. I couldn't find any. Now, I didn't spend weeks looking for it, so maybe I just didn't search the right terms and I didn't look at the right places. Mm-hmm. The articles I did find about it were more just like our interviews with psychologists in journals or magazines like Psychology Today and things like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what I found, I think it was only two. There were clinical and or counseling psychologists who would say the same thing. Well, context matters. If we're talking about kind of large societal things, mm-hmm. similar to that legal framework we were mentioning earlier, then impact versus intent makes a lot of sense. In fact, while doing this research, it was like 9-1, the amount of articles that talked about, well, your intentions don't matter, it's your impact. So maybe that's why this is such a thing for
why I'm triggered by this
out there. Yeah.
Yes.
If you do a Google search on this, I think I went up to 5 pages and it was 90%.
Can I just yell? Can I just yell first? And I'm going to start yelling.
Yes, I'm ready for it. Let's do it. Yell.
This is what's frustrating is I think that every psychologist that would ever be like, that would write an article or sort of project their views out there, not everyone, 98% of them would all say the impact matters, intention doesn't matter at all. But when those same psychologists go and work with their clients, I guarantee you they are, after they have validated and supported like they're going to make their client feel understood, they're eventually going to work around to, okay, let's talk about how your emotions are impacting your behaviors and whether or not you are happy with what your behavioral reaction is.
Yep.
Psychologists are, I think, if they're worth their salt, are very intentional about helping people understand what was the event that got you to be upset? How did you feel? What was that upsetness about? How did you understand it? And how did you react? Because at the end of the day, the reaction, the actual behavior, and the event that triggered the behavior, those facts are really important. We can't just always go, hey, well, that's how it impacted you, so deal with it.
Yeah.
Right? So I think those same psychologists behind closed doors are operating in a place where the objective reality really matters. And then when they get with their peers and start talking, they all of a sudden go like, oh yeah, facts don't matter. It's just about the impact. And it's like, no, the intention didn't matter and the impact didn't matter. What should matter is what happened. Can I yell? I'm going to distract. Can I just yell one more? Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
I also think this is important because it disrupts our natural way of learning. My way of knowing whether or not I am funny, by the way, I think all my jokes are hilarious.
We all
100% of them.
Not your jokes, of course.
Right.
We all think our own jokes. I think your jokes.
Oh,
are
sorry.
terrible, yeah.
I think my jokes are really funny. The only way I know if I am funny or if I'm not funny is if I get an honest reaction back from my audience. If I make a joke and somebody laughs, I know that was good. And if I make a joke and nobody laughs, I know that wasn't good.
Right. Right.
But I feel like what happens is somebody makes a joke and the audience believes that because one person was offended, that now the joke was bad. And then the joke maker gets feedback that it was bad. But it's like, is that feedback actually accurate based on fact? Or are we just allowing the impact it had on one person to disrupt that sort of feedback loop? Does that make sense the way I'm saying that? Like,
it makes a lot of sense to me. I will talk a little bit about, you said it disrupts learning. And I would say that I think the way this framework is used can do that in a variety of settings, because then in that scenario, maybe not you, but a lot of other people up on that stage, if you actually want them to think about something differently, because maybe what they said is objectively offensive to our society as a whole. How do you get them to think about that? It's not probably labeling them as something you're saying, hey, you're negatively impacting me as a person. I think there's some shame that goes along with this that can then cause people to be very defensive.
Yeah. Defensive, like you mean the person that made the joke or engaged in the negative behavior can be defensive about, like, oh, I didn't mean to be, that wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, or get over it, snowflake.
Yeah.
As opposed to, and what we're talking about is maybe an extreme example, but it's how do you engage with these types of individuals if you do feel like what they're doing, even if it didn't impact you emotionally all that much, if you feel like, hey, you might need to be aware of this, there's probably different approaches to that as opposed to starting to label people something. Because I think what we'll talk about a little bit later on is this framework is often used to then start labeling people a certain way. Like, all right, well, you did this thing. It had this impact. It probably means that you're this. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So if I was going to argue against myself, I was going to agree with you. That's what I would say. Is I would say, well, David, who's the arbiter of what is objectively funny or objectively not funny, or who's the arbiter of what that line is? And I guess I think the answer is that people should be reacting naturally. Like, I don't think that there should be it's not like there's a decision maker, but I guess I would hope that people could react. I guess I think there should be a discussion about it versus labeling it negatively or positively. I'll go further. So I said that the person who's the joke maker in this case, is the feedback loop is messed up because they're being chastised for, not what they said, but what the impact was. I also think the person that has been negatively impacted has a broken feedback loop as well, because they're being validated for everything that they experience. No one's ever saying, hey, that wasn't that big of a deal. Like, we're not allowed to say that. We have to just validate the person who's been victimized all the time. And so I guess I'm sort of saying, if we got out of this framework, would that help us have a more real conversation about what is and what is not offensive versus always agreeing with the person who feels offended?
It's almost like it's passively reinforced as opposed to being actively reinforced. Because in that situation, you may not get people who just stand up and clap for that person who goes up to the comedian and says something, but they're unlikely to get much negative feedback about doing what they're doing. Because, why? What would be the incentive for people to do that? Very little.
Yeah, correct.
Now that said, this is not a new argument to be had. I'm sure you're familiar with the term, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So this is not, while this iteration of this conversation may be new, especially in light of the past, at least in the United States, in the past decade, where we've started to think a lot more about systems and how governments and systems have unintended, sometimes intended consequences on people who have less power or say over how things get done. I think if I had to think about why this is more in vogue and in a framework that people use, I think that's part of it. That's why I know that's why I've heard about it a little bit more. And I mentioned before that context matters. I think this framework can be really important in those contexts. Like I would disagree with you.
Can I stop? Can I just stop this way? Make sure I'm tracking what you're saying. You're saying that it's more in the idea of impact being more important than intention is in vogue now because there's more scrutiny on our like global societal systems.
Yes.
And I'm reading between the lines here, but what you're talking about, I think about like racial issues that people will say there's no systemic racism. And then you're saying, well, wait a second. There is a segment of the population that feels like they've been mistreated. And so therefore I would go even stronger than that. It could be a feeling. I imagine that there is a strong feeling, but I would also say objectively, if you look at data, particularly historically, there are different outcomes. But so I guess that's why I wanted you to say it, because I want to sort of point out that even as we talk about systemic racism, it's not just a feeling, oh, I've been mistreated. There have been very objective mistreatments. There are objective differences as far as housing, as far as economics, as far as education. It's not like, this is just a group that's distressed. There's actual. So I guess for
there's
me,
objective outcomes. Okay.
Yeah, like I understand that the intention is we're going to protect this group, but I feel like by just saying if they feel this way, they're right. Well, then you're sort of invalidating the fact that no, they didn't make it up. There's reason for it. So it makes the argument actually weaker, in my opinion.
Or it can dilute it.
Or dilute it. Yes.
Yeah, maybe it's saying the same thing. But yeah, I think that makes sense because I think when you look at the outcomes, maybe where this comes from, there's data to support it. I guess the flip side of that though is, I mean, it's difficult to have data-based outcomes on someone's feelings. So is the alternative, or well, your feelings don't matter? What's the alternative?
I'm gonna lose every audience member here, but let me just walk through this, okay?
Okay, do it.
My wife believes that she carries the emotional burden in our family. And I have for years thought it was big fun to say, well, just because you're emotionally thinking that you're doing more, like let's look at what's actually been done. And I think that that's a fun like thing to piss her off about, and we argue about it. And I've even done YouTube video, right? But to me, it's less important that she feels that way, and it's more important that I go, okay, because she feels this way, let's go look and see, is there actually an unfair distribution of work being done or thought being done or energy put into our household? And the reality is, to Allison's credit, she does way more than I do. But I don't think it's important just because she's felt it. It's important that Allison and I can look back and go, okay, David doesn't make, yes, David went and got the groceries, but he didn't plan for the groceries. He didn't cook the dinner. I guess I feel like we should be stepping away from just the emotional piece and allowing ourselves to analyze, well, why does Allison feel that way? And is that accurate or not? I may feel like my wife never supports me, and that's helpful, but at the end of the day, I should sit down and go, is there data to support my belief that my wife doesn't support me? And there's probably not that much data. I just think that there should be scrutiny in it.
I get what you're saying. Maybe not as strongly as you do. A framework I oftentimes use, both in my professional and personal life, is emotions are indicators. They're not the end.
Yes. That's good. I will agree with that. That's better said than I said it. I would agree with that.
Yes.
It's an indicator.
So the emotion that you're feeling could be an indicator of a factual outcome and could not. But regardless, you're feeling it. But again, I want to take us back to context because I was talking about structural things. Now you're bringing us back down to interpersonal relationships.
Yes. Yep.
And
okay,
I think,
sorry. Yep.
And I think that this is where maybe your orientation makes more sense. And the two clinical or counseling psychologists that I saw write about this framework in a slightly more critical way would also agree. They would agree that in a societal or organizational setting, the impact matters more than the intent. But in interpersonal dynamics or small group dynamics, you have to understand the intent, and you can't just stop at the impact or the emotion, because otherwise then you don't understand what's actually happening, and then you can't fix it if there's something to be fixed.
I think I am reluctant to acknowledge this, but that is a really, I think, important comment and distinction. You're right. Like, I think the emotion, it's not that I'm saying your emotions don't matter, which is, I know that's
Right.
what I said, but that's not what I meant. You're right. We should be attending to the emotions, because they help inform like where we should be looking for the objective event that happened or that is happening. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And not that I ever want to come to your defense, but where I probably align to you a little bit more, and maybe other listeners would make sense, is sometimes the reason I feel the way that you feel is because it just feels like so much work, even as a psychologist. Especially, I'm a lot better at this in my professional life than I am in my personal life.
It feels like a lot of work to go investigate why is someone feeling that way.
Why do I have to do this? Can't you just get past it? Can't you just stop caring about this thing? And can't we just figure out what's the objective solution? What's happening here? And then move forward? Mm-hmm. With friends and family members, I oftentimes find myself thinking about that. My wife and I also joke about it as well. And I think we complement each other well because she's a bit more likely to call me on, well, you can't just go past it, especially like with my kids and stuff. You can't go past it so quickly. You want to be objective with an inherently unobjective being. You can't do that.
Right.
And it's a nice reframe for me. It's like, yeah, I know. I just want to. I'm tired. I don't want to do this. Mm-hmm. But so I think the interpersonal side is where I need to be better at probably doing some of this. Whereas at a societal level, I have found nothing. And I think I'm probably even in more agreement after preparing for this episode that that framework makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think I'm with you, except kinda, I think I'm with you. I guess I just have a negative reaction to this idea that, I mean, it's hard because we're talking about this and there's such a spectrum of stuff that we're talking about. Like we're talking about, overt sexual harassment where I'm like, yeah, you should do some work if you're, because in my mind, I'm going, that's a negative behavior. But I guess what I'm getting stuck on is when I don't feel like the behavior objectively is a problem. And I think that the interpretation or the impact of the behavior is an unfair one. And I guess I hate that the person who is the perpetrator or the person that's in the position of power usually is then forced to, I think oftentimes self-reflect to the point of excoriating themselves, how wrong they are. Yes. When it's like, well, wait a second, was what was done or said really a problem? So I guess here's my compromise for you. Shouldn't the person that was offended also have to reflect equally on whether or not their level of offense was reasonable?
I mean, I've never thought about it that way, but I think that's a reasonable critique. And maybe aligns with another critique of the framework that I found is oftentimes you're letting, in these situations, if I feel like your impact on me, regardless if your intent is negative, and I don't care about your intent, then you get to control my emotional experience. Well, why should I let you control my emotional experience? I shouldn't allow, and again, it depends on what we're talking about, right? It's a disagreement versus, again, a slap on the ass. It's very different. But, depending upon what we're talking about here, if you say something I don't like and I get very angered or frustrated or whatever about it, I agree with you that, well, I need to figure out, well, why did that thing make me angry or upset? And is that more my thing, or is it really your thing that you need to watch out? Because I think you're right. At least in a societal setting, there isn't much onus on the person who feels that way to do much about it. It's more, hey, it's you. You need to do something, person who said or did this thing.
Yep.
So I would say that makes sense.
This is a concession I didn't think I would get out of you. I'm very excited about it. Correct. I didn't think you'd get much of a concession out of me either. I would say the last point I'll make, where again there'll be maybe some agreement with you, is I think a lot of, at least how I experience these conversations that go in a very kind of accusatory, negative way is in the media, particularly social media. Yeah. Now, while I have a inherent bias against social media, so I may be someone who would think this, right? What you and I are talking about today is a lot of nuance. Well, it depends. How many times have we said that today? Well, it depends, and it's context and all of this. Well, in media, particularly social media, that's where, context goes to die. Nuance goes to die in all these places. And so I know that I particularly find myself struggling at times when I'm reading these things, and there's no objective. I mean, even if you go look and do a search on here, there aren't a lot of psychologists that are talking about this. Yeah. It's just people with an opinion who have a medium to share their opinions are talking about this. So like most things, it depends. You disagree? I have no thumb down. My computer just puts one up.
For those who didn't see, Dave has a magical power to either give a thumbs up or thumbs down, and then a little thought bubble with the thumbs up or thumbs down appears. So he was thumbs downing me. Not really. But yeah, I would say part of the reason I know that I feel sometimes pissed about some of this stuff is because it's debated in social media or in media more broadly, as opposed to there being any nuance to the conversation. Yeah. We turn it. We're kind of harnessing a very nuanced conversation and then like distorting it into a conversation that leads to an in-group, out-group discussion, either on this side or that side, right? And I think that's the problem. I mean, I guess it's funny. We should do another episode on this, but like, why can't nuance exist on social media? Like, why are we, from a psychological standpoint, so much more drawn to like obtuse opinions about things versus having any kind of sophistication? But I think we should, because it could be a longer conversation. My biased opinion is because it's dramatic, and people like to scroll and read things that are dramatic. Yeah.
You're intellectually lazy, and we just want the emotional, the kind of the serotonin boost.
Or it's voyeuristic. Like, ooh, look at these people saying these things. Yeah. All right. So I guess to wrap some of this up, so I think what we've come across is, all right, well, there's some context here. It may make more sense to talk about this framework at certain higher levels, societally, organizationally, to understand the impact or the outcome. Whereas interpersonally, maybe this framework doesn't hold up as well. Yeah. So interpersonally, Dave, I'd like to leave our listeners with a couple of pointers. Okay. What could they do? So if you find yourself, let's think of, you find yourself as the person who has negatively impacted someone else interpersonally. What do you do? What would you suggest someone do if they find themselves in that situation?
This is not what I would do.
After they roll their eyes and grunt and do all the things that you probably do.
I probably would complain. I'd call Rob. I'd bitch about the event. And then, so I think after you call Rob and complain, I think you have to force yourself to evaluate whether you have to use their emotions as an indicator to decide whether or not the thing you did was indeed a problem. And
you have to, again, I would agree with you. I would say maybe just to add to that, the conversation we're having before is sometimes I get lazy. I don't want to do this because it's just more work when I wish that someone would just understand and know who I am and get over it and we can move on. But I think part of the work in a relationship that matters to you with a friend or family member or, child, spouse, significant other is to try to understand, all right, well, why? Why did you think that? I mean, me, wasn't obviously what I intended. So what's going on here? So I think that's the work of someone who may have come across that way, assuming you want the relationship to be maintained.
Yep.
Now let's go the other way around. What if you're the recipient of someone who negatively impacts you? What do you do?
My suggestion would be to force yourself to explain without your emotion why you should or should not be upset by what was said. Like, is there data supporting the emotional reaction? But you can't say, I'm mad because they meant this nasty thing. I think you have to sort of go, what actually was said, and intellectually, can I justify why someone should be upset, or can I justify why someone shouldn't be upset? That's what I think you should have to do.
I think two things about that. First, you were restraining some emotion before you answered to this question. There was something else going on that I'd love to know what you're actually thinking.
Well, I tell you what I'm trying to not be I know that, speaking of nuance, I feel like our audience is going to listen to this and go like, classic date. We one time did a episode about the debate, and I took a far right position for 6 seconds, and I got canceled. And so I'm going oh my God, that people are going to think so I'm trying to have a thoughtful response and restrain, maybe who I really am, which is to have a more blunt, direct response. But I think the person that feels offended should force themselves to figure out why they're offended. Is it that something was negative that actually happened, or is there history that's driving your interpretation of the event?
I would agree. Maybe to add to that, at the appropriate time, because if I'm really pissed, I'm probably not going to engage in that reflection in the moment. So it's like a lot of advice we give to people who have to give or receive feedback at work. Like, hey, you can prepare for it, but the other person may not be prepared. The other person should have the opportunity to say, hey, I don't want to hear this right now, but I do want to hear it in an hour or tomorrow, because I need to prepare for it, and then give me some time to think about it so that I'm not reacting to it. So I agree with you, but I think you have to acknowledge that some people are going to be more quick and comfortable to react in the moment, and others are not.
Yep.
I would say, this may be simple, but it's the assumption of positive intent. Okay, why would an otherwise well-intended person do or say something like this that affected me this way? Well, it's probably not on purpose. So this is where I think intent does matter, again, in interpersonal relationships. Now, again, you have to know someone so that you assume that they're well-intended.
Yeah.
That could be helpful.
Yeah.
So I think broadly speaking, if I were to take a step back, in the situations where you do feel like someone's doing that, how do you not react in the moment? So that you can take some time to think through, to process, to do whatever it is you need to do.
It's funny. I don't know. I don't have a good quick tip for that, other than to say, I think people should honor the fact, people should be willing to question their emotions.
Yep.
And get in the habit of asking yourself, is this is this a healthy response to whatever it was? And that's true whether or not you've been offended by somebody, or if there's a problem at work, or anything. Whenever you have an emotional reaction, it's like, this is the same conversation if you asked me, how should somebody respond to getting their first B in high school? I would say I would want them to stop and go hey, is my reaction to this B a reasonable reaction? And it's the same, getting in the habit of sort of pressure testing your emotions, I think, is important. Just as it's important to get in the habit of pressure testing your interaction style. Yeah. Because you could be a absolute bull in a china shop and not be recognized.
Yeah, you could be an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's at some point, one person's reaction to you is a data point. 10 people's reaction to you is a theme.
Yeah.
So it certainly takes some reflection on both sides. It's not just the person who might be offended by it. So two things I want to ask that are kind of, now that we've given people some pointers. Can you have bad intent but positive impact? So I think the conversation usually goes positive intent, negative impact. What about the opposite?
Probably if somebody perceives it differently, like I'm sure it can happen.
Well, think about it for a minute. I had one idea that came to mind. And I think the idea came to mind because I'm in a hotel and I don't have cable or anything at home anymore. So I'm watching just old TV shows. And there was an episode of Friends on 2 nights ago. And the episode I think it's Ross and Phoebe who are going back and forth on altruism. Is anything truly altruistic? So if you give money to something, you feel better. So it's not altruistic because you have a positive experience doing so.
Yep.
So I think that there are certainly, and so that got me to think about this question. There are people who are not great people who have their names on buildings for hospitals and all kinds of stuff like that, that they're having a good impact. But I think many in society might say, oh, well, they're not very good people. They're not doing this for the right reason. They're doing it for the notoriety. But the outcome is a positive one.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, another sort of variable there is what is the conscious versus subconscious intention, right? Like
okay.
The person
I didn't think about that.
Builds the hospitals like, I'm doing a great thing. But like just below the surface, this is a very, ego satisfying endeavor. And so maybe, in that way, I would say that you're right, but then I'm wondering, okay, but what if you took out the conscious piece? Like if you just let if you just are intending bad things, how could it be negative? How could it be positive?
Yeah, that's true.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. Maybe, if your intention is negative and you're donating money for a hospital wing, that's a positive thing. So your intention couldn't be all that negative. Even if you did it for also selfish reasons, it's not the only reason you did it.
Oh, hold on. I got the answer. The answer is yes. There are a lot of times when somebody may, criticize you and mean it in a pretty negative way, and they're wanting to derail you. But if you interpret that criticism as a challenge, something you can overcome, you interpret it like it is the sort of the eye of the receiver to go, hey, wait a second, this person, whatever, said something really horrific about me, and I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm not going to let it get me down. I'm going to, right? My partner is cheating on me and is doing it right in front of me, doesn't care about me. I'm going to respond to this in a positive way. I'm going to get healthier. I'm going to find a new partner. I think you can.
I like that. I think my dad tells a story. I think I'm remembering this correctly. Of in high school, someone told him he wouldn't amount to anything because he wasn't a very good student. He didn't pay attention. And then fast forward, he used that as one example, one thing that stuck in his head, and like, all right, I'm going to prove that person wrong.
Yeah.
And he did pretty well for himself over the course of his life.
Yep.
That would be another thing. It wasn't very well intended, but it had a pretty positive outcome, at least part of it for him. Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that. Yeah. All right, Dave. Well, I think we've both come to better understand this framework. Yes. You've come to understand it better. I've come to understand your perspective better, which I didn't assume would happen.
Okay,
I can appreciate that. Thank you. Hopefully I never have to say that on another episode of this podcast.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be a trend. That's gonna turn into a theme, Rob. Before we go though, everybody, please hit the like this video if you're on YouTube, and check us out anywhere where you any social media: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, Shrink Space Show, and then we're also at Shrink Space Show
at
gmail.com.
That's right. And you should follow us because that would be a very positively impactful thing for both Dave and I and other listeners. So don't be a dick, even if you're well-intended. If you don't actually like and subscribe, we won't know.
Yeah, we'll be offended.
Again, your intentions don't matter. It's all your impact, right, Dave?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. In this case, I agree 100%.
I knew I'd get you there. If you have other questions for us, ideas for episodes, we've gotten a couple of ideas. Please keep them coming. You can also email us at shrinkspaceshow@gmail.com. Thanks, everyone.